Okay, guys, sorry about the slight delay there. That was user error on my side, so hopefully that doesn't throw you off too much. And welcome back to another live stream edition at We the Governed. And this is an Ask Me Anything, as always, event. And I want to encourage you to do so. Just to remind you, if you're going to ask me a question, please try to say at We the Governed, just so it's easier for me to see it in my feed here, so I'll know what are questions versus what's just chit chat between people watching the live stream at the same time. And just give me your feedback. I know we're about an hour earlier than what I've been doing some of these live streams lately. That's mainly because I had tonight I'm meeting with some activists, and they're about an hour away from where I'm filming this right now. So I needed to be able just to get there a little bit sooner. So I apologize for that. If you like my 6:30 time frame better, I think that's generally where the time I'm going to kind of start settling on for the live stream events. But for tonight, I started to do it at 5:30, so I hope that's okay. If I look a little tired or a little wrung out on the video, that's just because I've actually been very busy lately. And as people know, I do live fairly rurally. I do a lot of my own labor on the property, and I was doing a bunch of work outside on the property. I always do. And then I was up late. I've been doing a lot of Public Disclosure Commission, PDC complaints, and been doing a lot of research on a bunch of complaints. I've probably got about a third of the complaints filed so far that I had a bunch of research that I've done for them, and a bunch more to go. I'm thinking I probably have another 50 or so to go, and I'm trying to catch up on that and get those processed over the next, probably the next week or two. It's just I'm able to fit them in during the day, and I'm able to file a lot of different complaints and kind of catch up on it. I feel like I've been dropping the ball and not staying on top of it as much as I should. And so I do a lot of that work really late at night, kind of after, farm chores are done and kids are in bed, that kind of thing. So if I look a little late, and I had an early morning meeting this morning. So anyway, I just, you're always gonna be more judgmental about yourself, but when I look at myself in the video, it's kind of funny. So, and one of the things today, I only did one video today that I recorded earlier today. You'll see that in a little while. And the topic of this video is going to be about the collapse in the rule of law, and just some of the issues that we have in dealing with that, and kind of the negative consequences, I believe, of that going on around us right now. And there's a lot of work that we have to do. Jason, as always, thank you for jumping on and having the first question of the evening here. Thoughts on indictment in Georgia leaking out of Big Fanny in Atlanta? They had cameras marching around like a reality show, and the judge had his re-election information on the TV. Yeah. That was part of and I don't usually get into national issues in my videos, as anybody knows, or if you read any of my articles, it's pretty rare that I get into national issues, mostly because I think there's a lot of people that make commentary about national subjects, and they're probably better than I am, and they're going to be more tied into the DC crew. Whereas there's almost nobody commenting about what's going on in Washington, or very few people. And so I try to focus on local issues. But I really think this issue about what's happening in Georgia with this current indictment here of Trump is an exceptionally good example of abusing the power of the state in what is, in essence, an exceptionally heavy political effort to try to sabotage a political candidate. We've actually not seen this, at least I don't think that we ever have. I'm trying to go back through American history just in recent generations to see if we can find something equivalent to the level of intervention that we're seeing occur, kind of this organized intervention to try to prevent somebody from running for office. And I don't think that there's any parallels to this, at least in American history recently. I might be wrong, and I'm happy to be proven wrong, but I just can't imagine one. It's the level of lawfare, and it's not just listen, Trump is just another politician, so I get it. He has to comply with the law too, but the absurd level of attacks, like really kind of organized and orchestrated around the country against him right in the middle of this campaign, is way beyond anything I think we've ever seen before. And as alluded to by Jason's question here, the fact that the court actually published the indictment before the jury had even voted on it, accidentally, on their website. And the fact that both the judge and the prosecutor are fundraising and campaigning kind of on this indictment of Trump is, I mean, it just makes it ugly. Plus the fact that if you look and actually read the indictment, you're going to see that. I mean, it reads it's just silly, the things that they're trying to go after people for. I mean, forget Trump. Just look at these 18 other people that they're supposedly going after in this indictment for doing things like making phone calls or asking questions, or the minimal, not making Twitter posts, hardly a secret. And it's just bizarre, the level of abuse that you're seeing directed at one guy. I've never actually seen this happen. I don't think there's any politician in American history that's ever had this happen to him before. So it's really, really bizarre, the level of unequal treatment that you're seeing in this Trump case. It's not unusual in the sense that you will see the rule of law, as I've argued and did it presented in my video. You'll see kind of a collapse in the rule of law in other ways in other places around the country. If anybody had watched the in Wisconsin after Scott Walker was elected, the abuse of local district attorneys there when they did these John Doe cases and they went after conservative activists all over the state, sending in SWAT raids on their home and seizing computers and threatening people and silencing them and all that. And eventually higher courts kind of threw all that stuff out. But they achieved the mission of, I think at the time, of derailing a lot of conservative activist movement that was going on there, or the IRS harassment of the Tea Party back in 2009, kind of that 2009 through 2013 timeframe. It was pretty extreme. And I was kind of on the front lines of that when I was working at the Freedom Foundation, taking calls from these organizations that were being harassed by various agencies that were at the same time, of course, leaving the left alone, but then obsessing and attacking these nonprofits that were being set up by the Tea Party folk at the time. So the issue is, there's nothing good about having a collapse in the rule of law or unequal treatment under the law. You really have to have consistent treatment under the law. Otherwise, you do run into situations in which you're simply fanning the flames of understandable rebellion and resentment in the country, which is being done. I think they're purposely trying to do that right now. But you're also creating just this horrible distrust between the people and the people they've elected. Now, granted, the people we've elected have given us many reasons to distrust them, and I don't believe you should ever trust anybody in government as a general rule. Always distrust and then verify later. But when you really start breaking down society, so the rule of law no longer matters, there's no good outcome for that at all. It doesn't end up well, and it's something that we should be significantly concerned about. And so I really believe that we're really in perilous times in a lot of ways with what we see going on. And it's something that we have to be aware of and make some sense out of it. Now, if you look at locally, Bob Ferguson in Washington State as the Attorney General has done very much the same thing that this DA in Georgia has done, in the sense that he's structured his entire operation at the Attorney General's office in Washington State for the last 12 years as being basically an operation to promote his future political aspirations to be governor. So you can see both in who he prosecutes and how he promotes it, and the way that he issues his press releases and then quotes from his own press releases in his campaign materials afterwards. He's really oriented his entire office, Bob Ferguson has, as the AG in Washington, as a self-promotion political entity. And that by itself is not unusual. What we're seeing happen in Georgia is the same thing that Bob Ferguson's doing here. Bob Ferguson's not alone. That's certainly the way other politicians in the state have also operated. But it is not good. It's when that starts to happen, people get quite understandably resentful, and you might be exposing the truth about who these guys really are. But a lot of people aren't catching that. And so when in my video today, I talk about the importance of being an activist and how you have to expose this stuff. Please don't presume that there's anybody in traditional media that are going to be involved in doing that. I mean, there's not a single person working for the Seattle Times or King 5 News or any of these other traditional news outlets, the Tacoma News Tribune, Spokane Review, none of these people Spokesman review. I mean, you might have a guest, Sulani Matson. I think that's a pretty good job out there sometimes, but generally, you just don't have anybody at most of these traditional media outlets that are going to bother to do anything but what the state tells them they need to do. So they're going to ignore any problems with the state or any problems with the establishment. They're going to protect them, conceal them, and hide the truth, and they're just going to promote what they're told to promote, which makes them essentially an appendage of the state. So there's nothing good about that. TZ, you had a question about Washington Bannon lawyers. They're saying that they're afraid of the courts coming after them. What are your thoughts on lawyers not wanting to defend Trump? Well, okay, so this is actually kind of an interesting combination here. You have this collapse in the rule of law and the way the state has chosen to operate, and it really operates at a couple different levels. You have a collapse in the rule of law in the sense that they're not prosecuting criminals in many cases, especially if you have a left-leaning oriented prosecutor or judiciary in that area. By the way, there's nothing new with this attitude. It's the same thing they did in the 50s and 60s that led to the crime wave of the kind of the late 60s up through the 80s and 90s. That same thing's being done right now. So it's identical. So those people there's a breakdown of the rule of law. So the regular law abiding citizens are just thinking, wait a second, these guys are able to steal stuff by the millions of dollars from the stores. They're able to rob us, steal our car, and break into our homes, assault us, and nothing happens to them. That's part of the collapse of rule of law. On the political level, you see this weird dynamic. Trump's an example, but he's not alone. And in various states, the prosecution of Tim Eyman in Washington State is a good example of the complete abuse of prosecutorial discretion and disproportionate beyond any other example in state history, directed at Tim Eyman for the great sin in particular of basically cutting taxes through his initiative process. And at the same time, ignoring any kind of corruption that goes on with any of the main elected officials in the state. When corruption does occur, they either look the other way or they're not prosecuted. So that's unequal treatment of the law. So you have criminals on one side, and you have this unequal treatment under the law. And then at the same time, the state's more than happy to impose absurd and ridiculous administrative state rules that they enforce rigorously, like whether you step on a pocket gopher in Thurston County or not, or whether your house is the wrong color if you're in some of these homeowner organizations, HOAs, or whether your porch is 6 inches too long, or whether you paid enough in tens of thousands of dollars in fees to be able to put that barn up on your property. Whatever these other administrative state sort of things, they're rigorously enforced, right? Viciously, rigorously, endlessly, abusively enforced. And at the same time, if somebody comes in and robs from your house and steals your car, nothing happens to them. They assault you, nothing happens to them. That kind of stuff. That's really where you start to have this real significant breakdown. And so, so I think that there's nothing good about that. And that's the kind of thing that we have to start to recognize, that you really have a fundamental breakdown in society when the rule of law is not followed or enforced. And so, consistently, right? So that's a big issue. That's definitely an issue here for sure. There's another question here. Why do you think the Great Reset is happening? I have my opinion. Very curious on your take. This is a question from PNW Grace Through Faith. Well, I don't necessarily the idea of the Great Reset, right? There's two different theories that are kind of combined there, and one's from the left and one's from the right, so there is this idea on the left that they would certainly, and there's nothing new about this. This really goes back to the mid 1800s, where the left has always wanted to reset society one way or another. Really, the French Revolution in a lot of ways kind of personified this. If you really go back deeper, you can go back to Rousseau and stuff. But basically, this idea of remaking society in some kind of utopian vision. It's a path to guaranteed failure. It'll never succeed. It's always a failure. It's always a disaster. The latest iteration of this is what you see going on right now, pretty much across the industrialized world. But it's this idea that it's kind of an attack on individual freedom and rights. If you ever read the Communist Manifesto, which everyone should, one of the things they have to do in order to succeed was always to attack property rights and always to attack individual freedom, attack the family, attack religion, right? So they want to attack these things because those are what stand in the way of a reset of the society in the way that they want it for their utopian vision. Very similar to the French Revolution, actually, and which was pretty destructive. I mean, the guillotine being the most obvious element of that, but all of the horrible crimes that were committed in France right around that time. So this idea, it's not particularly new. And on one side, you have these elites that think that they can push this super utopian vision down on the rest of us. And then there's also the sense that many people are recognizing that government's failing, or it's out of control, or they're not doing the right thing. And so when we talk about this Great Reset, I hear people reference this, it really is being referenced in a more conspiratorial sort of way. And I say conspiracy just in the sense that it's presuming that these people are coordinating and trying to do this on purpose, which they might be, but there hasn't been a secret that that's been kind of an aspiration. Anybody that's gone to college in the last 40 years has certainly heard the theories bandied around, on campuses, and people have talked about these issues. And right now, I think that there's definitely an abusive nature of government that, with the administrative state out of control and things like that, I think that's kind of where they're trying to push this. So it's not a good thing, and we really have to strive to expose what's truly going on in our community and recognize it for what it is. The point is to intimidate and silence you, and people like me silence us and make us go away. That's really what they want. They can't prevail in this effort unless you let them, unless I let them, unless a sizable enough percentage of us let them, and there's not enough opposition. If there's enough opposition, then they have problems. And so that's really what they're trying to do, is silence their opposition. I think that's what the attack on Trump is all about. And I don't care whether you love Trump or hate him. It doesn't really matter at this point in time. Trump's clearly the perceived greatest threat to the establishment that exists out there today. And there may be a lot of people, even people who call themselves conservatives, who don't believe that, and they don't accept that Trump is, but that is how he's viewed. So there's nothing that they're not willing to throw at him. I think it's fairly significant sense of desperation that's going on there. So we're in troubling times, but those usually create opportunities that we have. I really think a lot of this is an example of an overreach by the state, and that tends to generate substantial change in a society or a culture. And it doesn't have to go the wrong way. It can, but it doesn't have to. And I'd rather have it not go the wrong way. I'd rather have us make the fixes that we need to make as quick as we can. Somebody made a comment, I think TZ, same guy who just asked this one question. Without a free and independent media, we can't stand as a republic. And there's a lot of truth to that, which is why the independent media, people like me or other people that start up and want to report on independent things, they're basically, we are the threat that they're afraid of. So that's the whole point in sharing this, exposing the truth, getting more people out there. It's not about me. It's about getting a lot more people like me out there doing this stuff. And I think we can make a big change in the future. The landslide, you mentioned collapse in the rule of law. There's the point. It's certainly one of the objectives. It's just a step along the way, though. Derek, you're talking Washington, California has the highest requirements for initiatives in the nation. Can the people create an initiative to cap the Washington state initiative requirements? I will point out I don't know about California, but I know the Washington state initiative process. When you say the highest requirements, if you're just talking about signature gathering threshold, I don't think it's out of line. It's 8% of the people who voted in the previous governor's race. So that may seem like it's a high threshold, but you really don't want that to be a super easy process to gather signatures. You want it to be popular enough and significant enough that you just can't have every crazy idea possible get on the ballot. It has to be something that people really like. And as many people watching my channel know, I'm a big fan of the current 6 that are being pushed by Let's Go Washington. Those are very reasonable, I think, very middle of the road, very normal, widespread support sort of initiatives. Those are the kind of initiatives you want to go out and collect signatures. And even there, it takes a lot of effort, a lot of organizing, and to get that through. So I don't think that part is what we have that's so high. I don't, if you're referring to anything else, you might be referring more to the WACs or some of the rules, the Secretary of State's office, but I don't know. I don't know anything different. And we are able to do it if we have things organized and people not apathetic. It's very possible to get these things on the ballot. That's great. Rebecca, great question. What news source do you recommend? I recommend you finding lots of local news sources and kind of combining them together. On a national level, I don't know, just look for people that are willing to be critical of government, and that's a good place to start. Those who are cheerleaders for government are not the right place to go for your news because they're never going to report the truth, not even close to it. Lancelot, you got a question. Can we hope for decreasing fuel costs at all in the future? Sure, you can, but you're going to have sane people in charge of government who are actually willing to recognize just some basic, simple things about facilitate. There's a couple things that all of us need to live in a modern society. Food, electricity, fuel, right? Just essentially housing is kind of wrapped up in that perception of that is. And so what you want to do is, in order to have a society that doesn't cost people more, that the majority of people can kind of afford to live in, you want to do things that reduce the cost of food. And historically, and this is just an example, historically, that's been true. I mean, our state and our nation actually does a lot of things to facilitate a lower cost of food production than what you would have in countries like Europe, where they add a lot of cost to food production. So you have a lot of things here, like where they have fuel tax reduction. In other words, agriculture doesn't have to pay the same taxes on fuel. They can get they don't have to the same type of taxes on supplies. The tax structure is set up in a different way. Our sales tax in Washington State, we don't put sales tax on food, for example. There's a general recognition that any kind of taxes or anything that increases the cost of goods associated with food is a net negative in society and is a bad idea. Now, until recently. Recently, the left has had some of these ideas that and when I say recently, I'm defined like it's the last 30 years. So the left has really come up with these ideas to attack the food supply. So attack farming, make it harder to have row crops, make it harder to raise animals, make it harder to feed animals, make it harder to transport animals, make it harder to properly manage, supervise the food chain, make it more difficult for you to get local food grown locally. And those things are net negatives. And so the left is doing stuff that's going to directly impact the ability of people to eat food. And because it increases the cost, it adds to inflation. At the same time, they do the same thing with electricity. The fact that our state alone in the universe is the only one that considers hydropower not a renewable resource. It's absurd because we're also one of the few states that the majority of our power comes from hydropower. So that's destructive because what it does is it requires then the state to implement super expensive, very unreliable alternatives to power and make that cost added to the fuel cost or to the cost of electricity. Again, that's just it's a universal tax on everything in life. Fuel costs are the same way. If you keep increasing the cost of fuel, it affects everything, the delivery costs, everything else that's associated with life. And so when people were in government who had the general best interest in mind in the past, they recognized these things were things that we wanted to reduce the actual cost on. The reason why public utility districts were created in Washington State had a lot to do with the idea that we wanted to have low-cost power provided for everybody. Agricultural co-ops, the building dams for irrigation purposes, not just for power generation, all of these things to make agriculture cheaper. All of these projects in the past were done to keep the cost of living relatively low. And I think they've been successful. But of course, the trend lately by big government types and the left in general has been to downgrade that to increase the cost of living. And those are bad ideas. And it is very possible to get to where you would have lower cost fuel than what we have now. But the trend from the state standpoint and from the government or regulation standpoint is making it worse. Rebecca, yep, for world or national news, it is hard to know what to believe. I always say check a number of different sources. Look for people who are willing to provide you source documents. I think that makes it better. This is definitely something that everybody should be doing. Let's see. When do you think a new currency will be in full effect, doing away with the dollar? Do you think that's part of Agenda 2030? Listen. I don't know on currency. I mean, the one thing to remember is that devaluing the currency is always a common trend for thousands of years that's occurred in human history. When a government is in trouble with how they print or run how they print money and basically how they run their own economy, the U.S. dollar has actually withstood. Longer, I think, almost than any other current currency in the world. But at the end of the day, especially since they got off the gold standard in 1972, this lack of attachment to something tangible has basically done what it's always done in history, which has allowed government to just print unlimited quantities of money, which then in turn devalues the dollar. I'm being very simple as I'm talking about this, so I understand the economic elements here. What I'm saying is, I don't know when they're going to implement a new currency. People have been talking about the dollar going away since before I was born. And the reality is it's still here. And it isn't so much that the dollar is great, it's that all the currencies are basically being inflated all around the world. And so this fighting for currency inflation that's occurring, there's probably a long ways to go before they totally trash it and then decide they're going to do something else. They can always intervene and do something. I think that people who are always expecting the end of the world to happen tomorrow are going to live many years before they see necessarily that happening. But again, you should always be prepared. And I think being prepared is a smart thing to be. It's more than just a Boy Scout motto. It's actually a pretty smart way to live your life. TZ, you're asking Mike Lindell holding another voter integrity seminar. He is, yeah. Are his claims of fictional elections valid, or are we at the mercy of individual states? Well, I know some of the people from Washington State that are going down to that event, and I think that certain states are going to do a better job, mostly in managing their voter rolls and providing a better process for voter integrity, tracking it. I think that basically the effort to do that is important, and I think it's one that doesn't change overnight. One of the things I think that a lot of people on the freedom and liberty side of the equation that we have, and it's a common failing, not unusual, is that you come in and you just want to change the world tomorrow because I don't want to be involved in politics. I want to get back to my life, right? That's typically how most of us are. Most people are. And the reality is that if you care about freedom and liberty, you have to be eternally vigilant. And just because you have a great victory or you maybe make tremendous progress, that isn't the end of the game. You got to stay involved because there are always grifters. There are always people who want to take advantage of the power of the state and manipulate for financial or personal gain or the pursuit of power or utopian ideology, whatever it is. They're always going to be there. They're not going away. Even if you have a great political victory and you think that you've achieved this nirvana, they're always going to be there trying to take it away. And so you have to be engaged and involved at all times, generationally. You just have to stay engaged and involved. So it never goes away. And I just think you have to make sure that you're engaged that way and don't just assume that if we go to Mike Lindell's going to come up with some magical solution. He won't. But maybe he motivates some people to find practical solutions, getting back to having a more reasonable voter roll process, for example, or a better way of auditing elections, things like that. Let's see. We are censored, Rock. You're right about that. Let's see. Okay, Bentley, you had a question. Do you prefer Semi Bird or Dave Reichert? Also thoughts on Raul Garcia. Well, just and I know I've talked about this in my previous videos, but Raul Garcia is not running for governor. He decided to run for the federal Senate seat that's coming up this next year. So essentially, when you look at those three individuals, Raul's really in a category by himself in the sense he's running for a different office. Semi Bird and Dave Reichert are essentially the two serious Republicans that are currently in the race. When you really look at the two of them, right, there's going to be differences between the two. Dave Reichert's going to be the safer establishment sort of candidate because he is a known quantity. He's been involved he was a congressman from the 8th Congressional District, number of cycles. Before that, he was King County Sheriff, most famously known as the guy who cut the Green River murderer. So he's been around the block, spent plenty of time in DC. He spent plenty of time in King County. He ran as a Republican in King County, which is usually sheriff's office is a fairly reasonable position to have a Republican if you care about the rule of law. By all accounts, he did a good job as sheriff of King County when he was congressman. He did some things I certainly disagreed with, but the big question between the two of them, I probably align more with Semi Bird as far as what I believe and conservative angle, and as much as I know him and as much as I've had a chance to talk to him. But I'll tell you what, I'd take either one of those guys. I guarantee either one of them, if they got elected as governor, would be a radical change in our state for the good. Certainly better than where it would be with any of the Democrats who are currently on the ballot. I think that Senator Mark out of the 5th legislative district is, as I've talked about before, he's the best of the 3 Democrats, but I don't think he has much of a chance of getting through. So anyway, that's how it is. Thoughts on our primary voter turnout, wins and losses. We had a relatively low voter turnout, pretty consistent with primaries in and off year election. And when we talk about off year elections locally, the 2021, 2023, 2025, these are the election cycles that usually most city councils, school boards, PUD commissioners, different little local positions like that are elected. And so few people turn out that getting engaged in those elections, you make the biggest change for the time that you put in and for what you're engaged and involved in. And we had a very low turnout. We did have a lot of school board races that are up for election, and most of them did not have primaries. There were a lot of candidates running, more than normal. That's a good thing. And those will all be on the ballot in the general. So I expect a lot of that to happen. A lot of those races to be pretty decisive and significant. I would expect that we probably have twice the turnout that we had for the as a rule of thumb, just generally the twice the turnout that we had in the August primary in November, mainly because in August, people are going on vacation. And even though, good Lord, we have the easiest possible way to vote by mail because we shoot it out like confetti everywhere, all over around the state. But amazingly, very few people actually participate. In November, more people will be doing that. And I expect that'll be happening. Let's see. We need more nuclear power. Okay. Let's see. Cool Runnings has a question here. I don't always watch your videos. Thanks for watching today. I am an independent, leaning conservative. Why is MAGA part of the Republican Party so strong? And why can't they see that that's not a winning strategy? Okay. So, one of the things, I think it doesn't matter whether you, and it's no secret when 2016 came along, I was on the Ted Cruz election bandwagon probably 6 months before Trump ever announced that he was running for office. And I admit, as somebody who lived in New York for 4 years when I was in college, that I didn't take Trump seriously when he started out and as a candidate. I voted for him in 2016, same in 2020, no problem. But I was very surprised. I was surprised anybody got elected in 2016. And I was very impressed with the campaign in 2020. If you remember, and it's easy to forget, he actually did quite a bit of work getting the word out and really ran a better campaign than probably any Republicans ever run nationally, at least since Reagan of '84. And so it was pretty impressive to watch that. And there were a lot of questionable things that occurred in the election of 2020. Anybody that says there wasn't isn't paying attention. However, politics encourages a cult of personality around anybody. I've seen it many times. Trump encourages a lot more people to be engaged in supporting him than most politicians that I've ever seen. And I can't think of anybody who's actually generated the kind of support and fervor that this guy has. I'm not that kind of person in the sense that I get all googly-eyed over a politician. I really don't care who they are. I don't think that'll ever be me, no matter what. So you're never going to see me being that guy. I try to be as maybe it's just that I've been behind the scenes too much with a lot of politicians over the years. Good people do dumb things and bad people sometimes do good things. I mean, it's just, you learn a lot about people, and sometimes I know more than I want to. So I think with Trump, what's interesting is that he's generated this really strong, very fervent sort of movement behind him. And I think to pretend that doesn't exist is wrong. Now, the surveys in Washington State, if this is what you mean, don't indicate that Trump is likely to win Washington, that he has less support here than he does in many other states. But he does win the sizable percentage of our state, especially rural and small cities. He does pretty well here. He brings in a new voting demographic than the Republicans have historically been able to in the past. And you essentially have two political parties in this country. So your view on individual freedom and liberty and your role of government and all that, generally that kind of shifts you into which camp you're in. And right now, the Dems have gone full crazy socialist, really, and it's hard to describe their platform as anything but that. Maybe a little more elitist, and so that's become the Democrat Party, and essentially everyone else goes to the Republican Party. It doesn't make the Republicans perfect at all, but it's it's just one of those things. So you're going to have people that are really big fans of his. I think attacking one of your own candidates for running for office is not a very smart thing to do, or attacking the people that support those candidates. And I don't think you're going to hear me doing that very often. Hopefully not at all. But generally, I like to focus on where the differences are and who would make a better candidate. But the truth is, right now, Trump has way more support than any of these other candidates that are out there running. So until somebody shows me otherwise, I don't see anybody else likely to come out of the primary on the Republican side. So, find a way to, you may not always support the guy that's running for office there, but you're going to have to get behind him. Let's see. Derek, you got a point about the initiatives in California, the number of signatures in California and the number of signatures in Washington. And you're right, as far as the signature number based on population is substantially higher as a rate in Washington state. But you're going to have to go back to the 2012 Constitution, change the state constitution, which is what implemented the initiative process in the first place. And the debates at the time in the Washington state legislature were to do a couple of things. One is they didn't want the ability of the people to change the state constitution itself. So that's true. They didn't want that. What they wanted was the ability of the people to overrule the legislature if they pass a stupid law or a stupid bill that was unpopular or that the people didn't like. That's what the referendum process was. And then they wanted to give them two ways of writing an initiative process: initiative to the people, initiative to the legislature. And so essentially that's what the Constitution created with that amendment. And I don't think it's a good idea to go back even and change that. I think you just have to find a process and a system where you go back and you make that work. Lancelot, you're asking me, how did I become such a patriot? I love America. I grew up here. I'm fifth generation Washingtonian. I love our state. I love our community. My family has a lot of history here. If you live out on the peninsula, there was actually, this weekend was 100-year anniversary of the Dalby water wheel, which my great uncle Dalby put in 1923. And the 100-year anniversary was this weekend, and birthday party they had out there. And in fact, one of the featured women of Mason County was my great aunt, Ethel Dalby, who's the M in her name is Morgan, for Morgan. And, my family's just always been involved in the process all over the state. Not obviously not everybody, but a good portion of them. My dad was involved in founding the city of Newcastle. Go to my website, you can see my bio, and none of this is a secret. So I think that if you travel around the world, when I was younger, I had a chance to go to China when I was in high school, going to Thomas Jefferson High School in Federal Way. And I had this opportunity to be on this running team and went to China. And visiting other countries around the world from that time on, when I was in college, after college, I backpacked a lot around the world too. And I think that if there's nothing else that makes you appreciate America more, is traveling around the world. And maybe not in some kind of a fancy cruise somewhere, but if you are actually backpacking, staying in youth hostels, taking trains, staying with normal people, traveling around, really seeing the countries out there, you're going to appreciate America far more than you ever would have before. Very few Americans really do that. And what I find is that doing that really made me love America a lot more too. Just, I like to see the world. I enjoyed it at the time. But you'd love America more the more you see the rest of the world. There is nowhere else to go. So we have to defend freedom and liberty here. You have a question here about possible news sources. Jonathan Cho is doing a good job. Brandy Cruz likes him. I love Jonathan Cho. I think he's doing a great job as a journalist locally. I like Ari Hoffman's work. I like Jason Rance's work as well. They're both radio show hosts in Seattle. They do a good job. There's a lot of activists in the state that have started to, start things. If you go in Spokane right now, there's a great new website started up called ontheball509.com. Great insight, great articles. If you're a conservative activist, I don't care where you live in the state, go to ontheball509.com, look at that website that's been set up and understand the value of the inside sort of detailed reporting and source documents they provide. That's the kind of stuff we have to do elsewhere. Port Townsend Free Press is another good example. And there's others out there, but I'm using those as examples. Please go look at those. Let's see. Great. I will see you at the Cowlitz Lincoln Day dinner. I hope so, Bentley. Don't remember when that is, but I'll try to be there. If you guys want me to speak, please let me know. I do speak at a lot of the Lincoln Day dinners or other events around the state. I guess I'll pitch this since you brought this up. I do activist training, and I'm happy to teach activists anywhere in Washington state. This isn't about building up Glen, Morgan. This is about trying to take the lessons and the skills that I have developed, usually through lots of hard and brutal lessons. I've made all the mistakes I think you can make. Not that I won't make more, but I've made a lot of them. You can learn from my mistakes and successes, and I could help train activists almost anywhere in Washington state or even outside of the state, but I generally focus in Washington. And also, if you want to bring me as a speaker for your events or your groups, I'm happy to do that. I do it all the time. And so that's one of the ways that I can get out there and try to help a lot of people in the state be more effective as activists. And so if I see a Cowlitz Lincoln Day dinner, that's great. But I also speak at a lot of those Lincoln Day dinners. Sometimes I'm MC at some of them as well. It's a little harder job, actually, but I'm happy to help. Let's see. Are there going to be audits of the voter rolls? We're very interested in helping. This is a question from Pat. Yes, there will. There is. But the audits of the voter rolls are actually being done by private groups, like the effort that I've been working on Washington Voter Research Project. That's one of them. And then some spin-off sort of efforts that are related to that. And I do think that we're going to have to start to take a little more aggressive stance in some of these issues. But, that's a little bit stronger. That's a little bit longer conversation. How close are Republicans to taking the Washington State House or Senate during the general election? The general election's in 2024. We're a few votes off. And really, if you want to look at the battle for the control of the Washington State Legislature ultimately comes down to just a few districts. North Whatcom County, which is the 42nd district, Island County, which is the 10th district, the Peninsula, which has been the mythological sort of district, the 24th. It's been trending conservative. It should go Republican, and it hasn't for whatever reasons or justifications. Probably a combination of running real campaigns out there. It's not an easy district to run in, and getting your message out well and doing that ahead of time. And then also in South King County and a little bit in Snohomish County. Those are pretty much the districts. At the same time, the Republicans can't lose seats in Clark County, where the Clark County Republicans oftentimes have a suicide pact where they like to fight each other and commit mutually assured destruction within the two factions, the Republican Party down there. So that takes a little bit more work. But I actually think we're not that far off. I mean, it was only a couple of years ago that we actually had a tie and we actually controlled the state Senate. So there's a number of these different districts that can swing back and forth, but that's really what it comes down to, are those districts as to, the 47th, maybe the 30th, the 30, not so much 31st anymore, but the 30th, certainly in the Federal Way area, and the 47th in East Hill, Kent, maybe the 5th district in Issaquah, but there's a lot of rich folk that have moved out there in that area. And my experience has been super wealthy people who are not attached to reality don't vote Republican. They always vote Democrat. So, Derek, you're asking a question: how can we get better voter ID and proof of citizenship to vote? To have a law in Washington State that requires that initiative or legislative process, you can do it either way. As long as it doesn't conflict with the 1993 motor voter law at a federal level. That's the law that really changed, I think, some of the rules there a little bit. Rock, I just ignore the government. That's great for you. Just don't get in trouble. Um, shouldn't Charles, you have a question here. Shouldn't the question be, why hasn't any other Republican generated as much excitement as Trump? Why are his competitors such garbage? Well, Charles, I have to tell you, I don't think you can say they're garbage. I just think that in comparison, they're, pale. It's I don't even know what it'd be like to try to run against somebody like Trump. That would have to be very difficult. I don't care who they are, and I don't care really what their background is. Trump's a colorful personality who's been well known across the country for decades before he ever ran for office. He has a lot of personality traits that make that his ability to present himself. There's some very popular. He has a lot of populist sort of attachment to him, and he did long before he decided to run for office. It's fairly impressive to me. So I think that there's a great question that somebody should ask is, if you don't like Trump, and these other guys can hardly even make any headway against him at all, even with the unbelievable attacks that Trump has had. How do you think one of those guys has any chance of prevailing in the general election if they can't get out of the primary? So we'll have to see. I mean, maybe something changes, but at this point in time, I don't see that being likelihood. Charles, yes, I've talked about ranked choice voting. Don't like it, and I've given a lot of reasons why in the past. But anyway, Michael asking, does Joe Kent have a better chance now against Marie Perez? Probably. That district's actually gone more Republican even since the last election cycle. But obviously, Joe has to campaign hard, campaign well, raise a lot of money, get out there and do a good job. The biggest problem with the Joe Kent campaign is not going to be really with his campaign. It's going to be the Republican divisions. Jamie Herrera Butler had a lot of supporters who are bitter forever, and they'll never vote for Joe. And that's probably what makes a difference there. But that's probably a mistake. Let's see. Portanza, Bentley, you had a question here. The dinner's September 23rd. You're listed as a speaker, I believe. Well, if I am, then I must be. So I'm just not looking at my calendar right now. That very well could be. Jason, will Sideshow Bob ban all of our guns and restrict us down to bullhorns and burglar bars like in Oakland? I don't think so, but I'm sure he wishes he could. I think Sideshow Bob is basically, Bob Ferguson's going to be highly distracted by his governor's race, and he thinks that he's banked enough lefty goodwill with the billionaire class in Seattle that he can buy his way into the governor's office. And the only question, he also, though, surveys is interesting. Even the left-leaning surveys have found that Bob Ferguson's negatives are incredibly high, probably one of the highest of anybody running for office in Washington State in recent history. So that's going to be something he has to overcome. So let's see. Cool running. So I know Trump does have support. What can't be explained away is how he underperformed Colt by 5% in 2020. Also, you do have to be competitive in King, Pierce, and Snohomish. Yeah, you do. And that's where you have to do better. And you're right. Culp did better than Trump in Washington State. So, and Culp wasn't alone. I mean, even, oh gosh, the other Republican, I'm sorry, who ran in 2016, running for governor, also did better than Trump back then. So, but Trump has an unusually high negative quotient among the left. I mean, they're rapidly insane, just irrationally crazy in their opposition to him. So I think that really makes a big difference. Let's see. Bentley, yeah, I don't want to bother. Listen, you're on my schedule, I'm speaking there for sure. So, are there landslide? Yes. Question: is there any building residential limits in Gig Harbor? Of course, it is. Our state is completely proliferated with lots of restrictions on building, which is one of the reasons why you pay so much for housing here. And so, it's not a question of congestion as much as it's just they aren't able to build homes fast enough in the area, and we have been growing, even though the Democrats are probably wanting to destroy that growth trend. But Derek, would it be great to have Trump on your show? Sure, it'd be great because it would jack up the viewership a lot, and then they would probably take my channel down for good. But that'd be kind of fun to interview him. I've never met Trump at all, and I've never talked to him. And so that would be unusual. And I don't care if you like Trump or not. It'd be interesting to interview him. It'd be kind of fun to actually talk to him. Let's see. Well, Will Monka Dinka's ethics violations actually affect her run for AG? Ethics don't seem to be terribly important to Democrat voters. Great question. This is from Sporting Systems here. Actually, Monka Dinker's ethics complaint, and I did my last video about this in a little bit more detail. She was fined based on an ethics complaint that I filed against her and a number of other legislators and senators at the same time. She was the worst. And though there's a lot of internal politics in the ethics laws are selectively enforced, like most laws in Washington state. But she got dinged and fined and officially found guilty of violating Washington state's ethics laws. I personally believe they did this because Eric Brown, who is the other Democrat who's currently decided that he's running for AG, is probably the more preferred candidate for the Democrat establishment amongst those two. And Monka Dingra, even among the Democrats, is viewed as crazy and nutty. And so they being the Democrat establishment, certainly happy to sabotage her campaign. So they allowed my complaint against her to go through and stick her with the fine and make the papers. If you'd notice, the papers picked up on that and wrote articles about it. They don't always do that. So somebody gave the papers permission to write articles about Monka Dingra's ethics fines, and they did it. So I kind of think that's part of the process. I think that Monka Dingra is probably in the process of trying to rethink her political strategy right now because she's not a total idiot as much as she might appear to be. And so she's probably coming up with an alternative political plan right now. And on the PDC, the Public Disclosure Commission website, it looks like she's raised more money, but I think Eric Brown's going to be able to beat her at this point in time. And so I think she might be shifting gears. Let's see. Charles, yep, that was maybe too far. Thank you. That was a good point. Thanks for adding that in there. Jason, does Sideshow Bob have a full-size portrait of himself hanging on his wall over his fireplace? I don't know, but I'm sure he wants everyone else to put one up that way. So that is the kind of guy he is. Do you know, here's another question from Gundog55. Do you know how much our gas tax was increased and where the money is going? Okay, well, there's a couple different tax increases that have occurred to influence the artificially inflated cost of fuel in Washington state. The most obvious is just the basic tax that the state imposes. And a percentage of that tax goes to technically for the roads, but most of it gets squandered by the Department of Transportation on dumb stuff, which is how government operates. They get your money and they waste most of it, but a little bit of it probably ends up in roads and bridges. Then the biggest increase that occurred this year, which was the carbon tax program, was really this off the books kind of scam where they being companies buy the right to pollute by buying these carbon taxes, and that's paid for by increasing, and it ultimately gets passed on. It's a cost of the fuel. And so you're paying an extra, it'll be about 50 cents a gallon or more. And that money is just going to, some of it does go to the state. But again, it's in a slush fund that the state gets to use in all kinds of stupid ideas. And so it's a big con, just like a lot of state-run operations are. And it also has very little transparency, so you can't really tell for sure what's happening with that money yet. And so it's just a waste. I'm hopeful and optimistic that the Let's Go Washington repeal of the carbon tax would be beautiful. It would just crash so many grifter operations that are out there. So anyway, I'm hoping that they can go down and do that. Let's see. Yeah, the hammer time you're asking, any suppression isn't good. Let's see. My question is serious. Okay. Here's a question. So somebody's asking Crafts. There you go. And Grandma Crafts, my question's serious. What is the best way to volunteer for poll watching or ballot drop-off box watching? Definitely poll watching. Ballot drop-off box watching is, it's like it's worse than watching paint dry. It's an empty box in the middle of nowhere, and because of Dinesh D'Souza's movie, right, about the Thousand Mules, movie about these leftist activists that were basically muling all this all the ballots to these drop-off boxes. People think that if they go post up there, that they're going to see some great and terrible violation. In our state, though, there's pretty much no law you can break. You could go out and collect ballots from homeless camps, drug operations, apartment complexes. You can do whatever you want, and you could drive up with a semi truck of ballots and drop it off. And in our state, that wouldn't even be illegal. So I do think that watching at the poll, which is really just the counting office, if you wherever the auditor is getting those ballots, I think watching that process closely is important. It does help people, because I think if you get into it and you're wonkish enough to understand how it's operating here, see if you can get hired by them and be an employee there actually temporarily during the election. It's great. I think it's really worth doing that. Let's see. Rock, a two-party system, is corrupt. Great. Yeah, everybody says that. And that's fine. But sitting back and doing nothing isn't going to help either. Let's see. What is the best plan of change as a senior citizen? Landslide, I don't know. I don't know what you're asking there, actually. Let's see. Agree with you on Hammer Time about the, just don't take away my stuff and leave me alone. And you're my candidate. That's probably true. Somebody here, Greg's talking about candidates like myself made it through the primary. What should my focus be right now? Great question, actually. Greg, your focus should be trying to reach voters. You need to get out and talk to more people, as many people as you possibly can. There's no such thing as too many people in the community, and you need to just get out there and be in front of voters. I'm shocked and stunned at how many freedom and liberty oriented candidates either got a massive fail in general marketing 101, or they are afraid of people, and it's absurd. I would recommend doorbelling, especially, it depends on what kind of a district you live in, but if you live in an area with a lot of apartments or trailer parks, something like that, because freedom and liberty oriented people, Republicans, don't tend to doorbell those areas at all, which is foolish and dumb. I would spend a lot of time doorbelling those areas. Forget the rich and big fancy neighborhoods with wealthy folk living there. Don't go there. That's a waste of your time. Go, because those people are generally they'll have already made up their mind one way or the other. But out in the community, regular people that are actually working for a living and trying to get by, they need to see you and hear you and understand that you're a better option than whoever you're running against. And you can only do that if you get out there. Literature drops at the front door, anything like that, to get in front of them. Don't waste your money on mailing. Generally, I don't think the mail, unless you have a lot of money, I don't think the mail really goes far. And we've caught the post office with too many screwed up problems. Jason, what's your thoughts on Republican candidate Byrd being recalled from the school board? Well, Jason, that was a big campaign that they had out there. The left was really upset at Byrd and other candidates on the school board out there. And so recall elections are apparently only allowed to proceed if you are a conservative or if you're remotely conservative. If you're trying to get rid of a leftist with a recall effort, good luck. I don't think you'll even get through the legal process most of the time. The only exception to that has been Kashama Sawant lately. And in fact, if you're going to do a recall election, I would use the Kashama Sawant proposal. And remember, she barely survived that recall effort. But the Republicans, they can run, they being the lefties running this, they have judges that are all going to accept whatever fake arguments they put forward to try to run you off the board. So that's just how it is. Where does a badge of honor, right? I mean, what is he being run off the board for? Allowing kids the option to wear masks in school during the complete disaster that was going. I mean, that's just silly. So let's see. Rock, you had yeah, that's great. Watching. Yeah, the number of people watching right now. Yeah, sorry, it's not more people. But I've noticed that for every person that watches during the live stream, there's usually about 4 or 5 that come watch later. So it's one of the reasons why I do these live streams. I know there's a lot of people that come back and watch these later on. Derek, you got good point. The fentanyl drug light trail train. No enforcement on it, of course, and no enforcement to pay for the train. And of course, the light rail fiasco, as long as math still matters, it's never made sense and it never will. So anyway, that's when can we have ID to vote? This is a question. Well, you can have that when you get rid of mail-in voting. Then let's see. Rock, you're saying I'm starting a new party. Is that doing nothing? It's not doing nothing. It just won't go anywhere. You're probably more likely to influence within the party, but also, you don't want to outsource I think people that direct their energy towards creating a new party, pick a cause, pick a place, pick something that you can spend your time working on and get some tangible advancement there. Maybe you don't like the school board, flip it. Maybe you don't like the city council, flip it. Maybe you don't like the laws your city has or your county has. Focus on repealing those laws or changing them or doing something different. Focus on something that's effective. And I don't know that a new party and all the drama of trying to maintain a party, that's going to give you something that you'll appreciate. Jason, did you see Jay Inslee caught flying on a private jet? I didn't, but that's common. He's been flying on a private jet for a long time. John Doe, Glenn, do you see the possibility of any initiatives hitting the ballot here in Washington State to overturn any of the anti-gun legislation, like the magazine ban or assault weapons ban? Most of the gun efforts to keep the Second Amendment and to restore basically our Second Amendment rights that these guys are trying to take away. Most of those actions are coming through federal court generally. I know there's some state court issues, and so the courts have been the path that they're going through right now. I actually think that if you have a Republican that you could elect as governor, then you could make some legislative changes and reverse all that stuff too. Initiatives between now and 2024, I don't see any of those happening yet. You could have an initiative the people next year that maybe could do that, but I'm not aware of any right now on the plans. There is one that they're collecting signatures for right now. And I don't know how far along they are on that. That's not one of the 6 that the Let's Go Washington folk are doing, but it is out there. Let's see. Yes, Derek, we do have a death tax. So that'd be a good thing to get rid of. I think it's great. The TZ, you're asking what's the Washington State GOP's outreach to Asian, Black, and Hispanic voters? I know a lot of minority voters who still vote Democrat and are conservative. Great question. I mean, the state party just elected a new chair. That's a good question for Jim Walsh. He's the new chair. Jim is probably one of the best communicators to hold that position in Washington State. I don't think it's an easy position. I wouldn't want to be chair of the Republican Party in our state, but and I don't say that to be negative. I'm just saying that I don't think I'd fit well in that role. Jim is probably one of the best communicators they've had there. And so I think that that's a great question for him. And I tend to agree that if you've ever doorbelled homes in majority sort of neighborhoods, you can't possibly come away from there thinking that there aren't a bunch of good voters here, that if they understood what their options were, that they would certainly, I felt like I connected with them pretty well when I've doorbelled in those areas. Yes, 12:40 hearing on Friday. Thank you. Sporting Systems. Dan, I hope that's you. I think that's great. And I give that, I'm optimistic about that approach right now, at least in the federal court. Derek Flores, would you consider to be a Washington State Republican communications director or political director or executive director? Not really. No, I don't have a lot of interest in doing that inside the party. I try to help in my own way. I want to fight the left, and I want to be aggressively engaged in that process. I don't think I'm optimally I don't think I can maximize my energy and time and interests in maintaining a party, and that's just different personality type. So the TZ, you're asking a question. The left spends years planning an idea to move the ball forward. Can we get the GOP to start pushing Steve Bannon's precinct strategy, go back to local in-person voting? I don't know. Good question for Jim Walsh. You could ask him about that. Let's see. Jason, what are your thoughts on the DeSantis campaign? I think DeSantis fell into a hole, grabbed a shovel and started digging. Honestly, it's time for him to drop out and stop. Maybe, the DeSantis surprisingly had a much less effective campaign when he launched. And I think that the people attacking DeSantis, you still can't diminish the fact that I think he's great for Florida and he's done a great job as governor there. That's a fact, and I think it's true. And I think he's done a really good job there. The problem that people always have is in politics, there's this idea you're either always moving up or not. And sometimes you just need to recognize you found your place and do a great job there. I would much rather have DeSantis there for another 4 or 8 years doing good things. And so it's not unusual for campaigns to, somebody who looks like Scott Walker from Wisconsin was another good example of this terrible national campaign. Did a great job as governor, blew up a national campaign, couldn't run it, save his life. Let's see. Good point. Washington Gun Law is a great YouTube channel. That's really important, and please pay attention to that. Let's see. It's Tim Eyman still in the fight. Haven't heard much. This is a question from Kevin. Not really. I mean, Tim Eyman is still around. Somehow he's surviving, but he does have a $5.2 million judgment against him, growing by the day. The AG Bob Ferguson, another example of the collapse of the rule of law and the unequal treatment of the law, has universally targeted Tim in a way that no other living soul in Washington State history has ever been targeted by the state. So, and keep in mind, I catch people breaking the law, same laws that Eyman was supposedly accused of breaking. I catch them all the time. And they get in trouble all the time. They get sanctioned, they get warning letters, sometimes they get fines. All those things happen to them, but they don't get a $5.2 million scorched earth, destroy your life, attack your wife, attack your kids, take your house, force a divorce, and bankruptcy on somebody the way that Tim Eyman did at the state. But remember, the greatest threat that Eyman represented to the establishment in the state was the ability to successfully pursue and get ballots on the initiative that cut taxes, or at least threaten to cut taxes. And so that's the biggest threat, right? So there is no threat greater than that, which is why I think that the Let's Go Washington initiatives, 4 of the 6 are targeted, popular tax cuts that, if they were implemented, will change people's lives in a good way, and also eliminate the grifting operations that they would fund otherwise in the state. So I think that's good. Pat, you're asking a question about, do we know what Inslee's up to politically? No, we don't. But I'm sure he's got some kind of a grift. They all do, usually when they reach this point in time in the political process. So I'm sure that he's probably planning to settle down and get a bunch of payoff and money for his terrible decisions and abusive governor career that he's had in our state. And hopefully he leaves and he goes somewhere else, but we will see how it works. So with that, guys, I want to be sensitive to the fact one of the reasons why I started this live stream a little bit early today was that I have to go meet with some activists later on today, and I'm about an hour drive away. So I want to finish up this and kind of wrap up the live stream for tonight. You guys had a lot of good questions. Thanks for kind of covering the spectrum of a couple different issues here. Again, I'll see you next week. I think my plan next Tuesday is to do a 6:30 live stream instead of a 5:30 this week. And that might have a little bit higher turnout on people who are watching live. But I really appreciate everybody asking your questions and giving me feedback. Please don't forget to hit subscribe if you aren't subscribed. I think most of the people probably, if you're watching this live stream, you probably are subscribed. But if you know other people who should be seeing this video channel, please share it with them. Hit like, push it out. I know I'm shadow banned. I know that YouTube and the powers that be don't like me, but you still are able to get the word out a lot more than you realize by doing simple things like that. So with that, I hope that all of you have a wonderful day. It's very hot out there right now. It is fire season, even on the west side of the state. So be careful, and we will see you next time.